At the picnic, my mom casually said, "Next time, don't bring the kid." No one spoke up. No one defended my son. Then my oldest daughter slowly pushed her chair back, her eyes locked on my mom. "Say that again," she said. The entire table fell silent. And then, the words hung in the air, heavier than the summer humidity, and in that agonizing silence, my own mother looked me dead in the eye, dismissing her 6-year-old grandson as if he were a stray dog. Sunlight dappled through oak leaves, casting shifting shadows on the checkered tablecloths, and the distant laughter of children felt a million miles away as the world suddenly held its breath around us. I'm Sarah, 34 years old, living in a quiet suburb of Ohio with my 2 incredible kids. My daughter, Chloe, who's 13 going on 45, and my little guy, Leo, who just turned 6. He's all missing front teeth, dinosaur obsessions, and endless questions about how the world works. I'm a dental hygienist a few days a week, picking up extra shifts at a clinic on weekends. We're not struggling, but we're not exactly thriving either. You know that space, right? Where a flat tire can derail your entire month. Yeah, that's us. Now, before you can truly understand what happened that day, you need to know a little bit about my family, especially my mother, Eleanor. She's always been the kind of woman who needed to be the sun around which everyone else orbited. Not with loud outbursts or dramatic scenes, though. Eleanor is far more subtle, far more insidious. She'll smile sweetly as she delivers a line that makes your chest clench. She'll compliment your new dress, then add, "It's brave of you to wear that." She'll tell you she's proud, then spend the next hour extolling the virtues of your cousin's latest achievement. It's a slow bleed, a quiet dismantling. And my dad, Frank? He learned a long time ago that it was simply easier to agree with Eleanor. He's been nodding along for 37 years. Sometimes, I think he forgot he even had his own opinions, but honestly, that's a whole other story for another day. For years, I was the one who held them up. Not with grand gestures, but with consistent, quiet support. When their furnace died 2 winters ago, who sent the $1,200? Me. When Dad needed new tires and they were behind on their insurance. Me again. When Eleanor wanted a fancy birthday dinner at a steakhouse and conveniently forgot her wallet. Guess who picked up the tab? I never complained. Not once. Because that's what family does, right? You help your people, and you trust that one day, when you need them, they'll show up for you. Except they never did. The one time I asked Eleanor to watch Leo for a weekend so Chloe and I could go to a volleyball tournament in Columbus, she said she was too tired. Leo? He's the easiest kid in the world. He watches cartoons, eats anything, and goes to bed at 8:30 without a single fuss. But she was too tired. Then I saw on Facebook that same weekend she'd hosted a canasta party with 6 friends, complete with 3 kinds of dip. 3 kinds of dip, but too tired for her grandson. That stung. It always stung. But I always swallowed it. I always did. My cousin Michelle, on the other hand, saw it all. Michelle is my Aunt Betty's daughter, and she lives about 40 minutes away. We've been close since we were little. She's the only person in our family who ever looked at me and said, "Sarah, you don't have to keep doing this." She saw how Eleanor treated me like an ATM with a heartbeat, and she hated it. Michelle was my rock. Every time I'd call her, crying after some subtle jab from Eleanor, Michelle would say, "Write it down. One day you'll need to remember why you stopped." I should have listened sooner. So, the picnic. It was the 4th of July weekend. My Aunt Betty, Michelle's mom, organized this huge cookout at Eastwood Metropark. The whole family was there, uncles, aunts, second cousins I hadn't seen since a wedding in 2019. Kids everywhere, burgers sizzling on the grill, old Motown music drifting from a speaker. For about 2 hours, it was actually nice. Leo was being an absolute angel. He was playing tag with Michelle's boys, sharing his juice box with a little girl he didn't even know. And when he scraped his knee on the sidewalk, he didn't cry. Not a single tear. He just walked up to me, showed me his knee, and with those big, brave eyes said, "Mama, I think I need a dinosaur band-aid." Tell me that's not the cutest thing you've ever heard. But Eleanor, she'd been watching him all afternoon with that look. You know the one. Like she'd just bitten into a lemon. Every time Leo ran past her chair, she'd sigh. when he accidentally bumped the table and a cup of lemonade tipped over. Not on anyone, just on the grass, she said, loud enough for half the table to hear. This is exactly why. Exactly why what, Mom? I swallowed it. Again. I cleaned up the lemonade, told Leo to be careful, and sat back down. Then came dinner. We were all eating, Leo next to Chloe. He was fine, just being a 6-year-old. Ketchup on his chin, legs swinging under the too-tall bench. And out of nowhere, Eleanor put her fork down. She looked at me from across the table and said it, with that same sweet, unsettling smile. Sarah, next time, maybe just don't bring the kid. It would be easier for everyone. The table went quiet. Not a conversational lull, but a dead, oppressive silence. Like someone had pressed mute on the entire park. Aunt Betty stared at her plate. Uncle Richard suddenly found his corn on the cob fascinating. My dad, Frank, took a long sip of his beer and gazed up at the sky as if searching for answers from a passing airplane. And Leo heard it. He's 6, not deaf. He looked up at me with those big, innocent brown eyes, ketchup still on his chin, and whispered, Mama, does Grandma not want me here? Do you understand what that does to a mother? Can you even begin to imagine? I opened my mouth. I was going to say something. Probably something polite, something measured, something that would keep the peace. Because that's what I always did.
Keep the peace.
Follow the rules.
Smile.
Send the check. But before I could utter a single word, Chloe put her burger down. My 13-year-old daughter, who had been quietly eating, minding her own business, wiped her hands on her napkin. She pushed her chair back from the table and stood up. She looked directly at Eleanor, her voice calm, steady, unwavering. Say that again. Not yelling, not screaming, just those 3 quiet words, like a challenge. 13 years old, standing there in her volleyball t-shirt and ponytail, daring my mother to repeat herself. The whole table froze. Aunt Betty's hand, halfway to her mouth, just stopped. Eleanor looked at Chloe as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Honestly, neither could I. Eleanor gave that little dismissive laugh, you know the one, and said, Chloe, sit down. This is an adult conversation. And Chloe, without missing a beat, responded, then stop acting like a child. I think Uncle Richard actually choked on his corn. But Eleanor isn't. One to simply move on. Oh no. Eleanor doesn't lose arguments, especially not to a 13-year-old. She looked at me, not at Chloe, and said, this is what happens when you don't teach your children respect. And I felt that old, familiar pull, that heavy weight in my chest that told me to apologize, to smooth things over, to grab Chloe's arm and say, honey, sit down, to protect the peace at the cost of myself. But something was different this time. Maybe it was seeing the hurt on Leo's face. Maybe it was hearing my own daughter do what I'd been too afraid to do for 34 years. Or maybe, just maybe, I was finally, utterly, irrevocably tired. I looked at my mother, across the table, across the history of our lives, and I said, Eleanor, Leo is your grandson. And if you can't treat him like family, then I don't see why I should keep treating you like mine. And then I packed up both my kids, my half-eaten potato salad, and what little dignity I had left, and we walked to the car. But trust me, that was just the beginning. Because what happened in the weeks after that picnic, that's when things truly got ugly, and the decision I made next. Some people in my family still haven't forgiven me for it. But here's the thing. I'd do it again tomorrow. I'm going to tell you exactly what I did. And I need you to be honest with me. Did I go too far? After the picnic, I drove home with the kids in the back seat, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Chloe was quiet, just staring out the window. Leo fell asleep with his mouth open, his dinosaur toy still clutched in his hand.
Me?
I was replaying Eleanor's voice in my head on a loop. Next time, don't bring the kid. Over and over, like a song you hate, but can't stop humming. When I got home, I sat in the driveway for a solid 10 minutes after I'd parked. Engine off, windows down, listening to the crickets. I thought, how many times have I driven home from a family event feeling exactly like this? How many times have I pulled into this driveway with that same knot in my stomach? Asterisk, the answer scared me because it was every time. Every single time. That night, after I'd tucked the kids into bed, I called Michelle. She picked up on the first ring, which tells you everything you need to know about Michelle. I told her what happened. Every word, every look, every second of silence from every person at that table. And when I was done, Michelle said something I will never forget. She said, "Sarah, you've been writing checks for people who wouldn't give you a glass of water if you were on fire. When are you going to stop?" I sat there in my kitchen at 11 o'clock at night, still smelling faintly of sunscreen and charcoal, and I said, "Tonight. I'm stopping tonight." Now, let me tell you what stopping actually looked like. It wasn't some big, dramatic announcement. I didn't post on Facebook. I didn't send a group text. I just stopped. Quietly. Completely. The first test came 9 days later. Eleanor called me. Not to apologize, obviously. That would require her to believe she did something wrong. No. She called to tell me the water heater at their house was making a funny noise, and Frank thought it might need replacing. And then she did the thing she always does. She didn't ask me for money directly. Eleanor is far too smart for that. She just said, "I don't know what we're going to do, Sarah. Your father's only working part-time now, and my knees have been so bad I can barely make it to the store. I just don't know." And then silence. That heavy, loaded silence that was supposed to make me say, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll take care of it." You know what I said instead? I said, "That sounds really stressful. I hope you figure it out." The pause on the other end of that line was so long, I actually checked to see if the call had dropped. It hadn't. She just didn't know what to do with a version of me that didn't reach for her wallet. She tried again 2 days later. This time, it was about the electric bill being higher than expected because of the air conditioning. Same script. The sigh, the "I just don't know," the long pause. And I gave her the same answer. "That's tough, Mom. Maybe you could call the electric company about a payment plan?" I could almost hear her brain short-circuiting through the phone. Honestly, a part of me felt terrible. I won't lie to you. There's a part of me that wanted to just send the money and make it easy. Because that's the thing about being the family fixer. It becomes your identity. You don't even know who you are without the fixing. Does that make sense to anyone? Or is it just me? But Michelle kept me strong. She texted me every morning. Literally every morning. A little message that said something like, "Day 12 of choosing yourself. Keep going." Or, "You are not an ATM.
You are not an ATM.
You're not an ATM." That woman deserves a medal and a vacation. Now, here's where the backlash started. Because when the money stopped flowing, the phone calls started coming. But not from Eleanor. Oh no. Eleanor doesn't fight her own battles when she can recruit an army. First, it was my Aunt Denise. That's Eleanor's youngest sister. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at work and left a voicemail that said, and I'm paraphrasing because the actual message was about 4 minutes long, basically, that I was being selfish, that my parents were struggling, that family helps family, and that she didn't raise me, but if she had, I would know better. She didn't raise me? She's right about that. She also didn't help raise me, didn't pay for anything, didn't babysit once, and wasn't at a single one of my school events. But sure, Denise, tell me all about family. Then it was Eleanor's friend, Carol. A woman I've spoken to maybe 6 times in my entire life called me to say she'd heard I was abandoning my parents and that she thought I should really think about what kind of example I was setting for my children. Carol, who I once saw steal a centerpiece from a church potluck, was now giving me parenting advice. Do you think I should have caved? Honestly, some days I almost did. But then something happened that made me realize I was on the right track. Leo came home from school one day, this was about 3 weeks after the picnic, and he sat down at the kitchen table while I was making dinner. He was doing that thing kids do, where they're clearly working up to saying something, but they keep opening and closing their mouth like a little fish. Finally, he said, "Mama, am I bad?" I put the spatula down. I turned off the stove. I sat down next to him and said, "Why would you ask me that, baby?" And he said, "Because Grandma doesn't like me, so maybe I'm bad." My 6-year-old was sitting there, genuinely trying to figure out what he did wrong. This kid who shares his snacks with every child at school. This kid who draws me pictures of our family with everyone smiling. This kid who said, "Excuse me," to a mannequin at Target last week because he bumped into it. And he thought he was the problem. I held him so tight. I told him, "Baby, you are not bad. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. And sometimes grown-ups have problems that have nothing to do with you." He seemed okay after that. He went back to playing with his dinosaurs. But I went into my bathroom, closed the door, and cried so hard I had to sit on the floor. That's when I made the second decision. The first one was cutting off the money. This one was bigger. I decided I wasn't going to any more family events until my mother apologized. Not to me. To Leo. She needed to look that little boy in the eye and tell him she was sorry and that she loved him. That was my condition. Non-negotiable. And I told her exactly that. I called her up and I said, "Mom, I love you, but until you apologize to Leo for what you said at the picnic, I'm not coming to Sunday dinners. I'm not coming to holidays. And I'm not sending another dime." You want to know what she said? She said, "You're going to punish me over a joke? Sarah, you've always been too sensitive." A joke. She called it a joke. My son questioning whether he's a bad person. That's the punchline, apparently. I said, "Then it should be easy to apologize for a joke." She hung up on me. And that's when the real war started. Because Eleanor told everyone. And I mean everyone. Her version of the story. In her version, I was the villain. I was the ungrateful daughter who cut off her struggling parents over a little comment at a barbecue. She left out the part about Leo. She left out the years of money. She left out every single thing that mattered. My cousin Michelle tried to set the record straight with some of the family, but you know how it goes. People believe the first version they hear. My Aunt Denise called me again. My Uncle Richard sent me a text that just said, "Family first, Sarah." Easy for him to say. He's never sent my parents a penny. Even my dad called me. And that one hurt the most because Frank isn't a bad man. He's just a weak one. And he said, "Sarah, sweetheart, can't you just let this go? Your mother didn't mean anything by it. She's been upset for weeks. She's been upset. My son thinks he's defective, and my mother is the one who's upset?" I said, "Dad, I love you. But you sat there. You heard what she said. You saw Leo's face, and you took a sip of your beer. So, I need you to understand. I'm not mad at you. But I can't pretend that was okay." He got quiet, and then he said something that surprised me. He said, I know I should have said something." That was the most honest thing my father had said to me in years. And for 1 second, I thought maybe he'd be the one to turn this around. Maybe he'd talk to Eleanor. Maybe he'd bridge the gap. But he didn't. He's Frank. And agreeing with Eleanor is still easier than anything else. Meanwhile, Chloe was watching all of this. My kid is sharp. She hears the phone calls. She reads the room. She sees me close my eyes and breathe before I answer texts. And one evening, she came into my room and sat on my bed and said, "Mom, I want you to know that what I did at the picnic, I'd do it again every time." I looked at this girl, my girl, with her messy bun and her algebra homework and her chipped nail polish. And I thought, when did she become braver than me? I said, "Chloe, you shouldn't have to fight battles for your brother." And she said, "I'm not fighting battles for him. I'm fighting battles with you. Tell me I don't have the most incredible kid on this planet. Just try." But what happened next, and I promise you, I did not see this coming, is the part that changed everything. Because someone in my family decided to get involved in a way I never expected. And the consequences, let's just say what my mother did after that made everything at the picnic look like a warm-up. I'm going to tell you exactly how she tried to turn my own children against me. And what I did when I found out. Well, let's just say Eleanor finally met a version of Sarah she'd never seen before. Remember how I said someone in my family got involved in a way I didn't expect? About 5 weeks after the picnic, Chloe came home from school acting strange. Not upset, just she kept checking her phone and flipping it face down on the table. If you have a teenager, you know when that phone goes face down, something is happening. I gave her space. We had dinner. Leo told us a 10-minute story about a lizard on the playground that made absolutely no sense, and we clapped at the end anyway.
Just a normal night.
But later, after Leo was in bed, Chloe stood in my doorway, arms crossed, and said, "Mom, I need to show you something, and I need you not to freak out." She handed me her phone. On the screen was a string of messages from my mother. Eleanor had gotten Chloe's number, probably from Aunt Denise, who has the boundaries of a screen door in a hurricane, and had been texting my 13-year-old daughter for 3 days. The messages started sweet. "Hi, sweetheart. Grandma misses you." But then they shifted. The way Eleanor always operates.
Slowly, carefully, like poison in sweet tea.
"I wish your mom would let me see you and Leo. Your mom has always been very emotional. Even at your age, she would overreact. Maybe you could talk to her for me?" She was recruiting my daughter, telling a child that her mother was the problem, asking my kid to do her dirty work. And the thing that made my blood boil? She never mentioned Leo. Not once. Didn't ask how he was. Didn't say she missed him. He didn't exist in those messages. But here's what I didn't know yet. Chloe hadn't just been reading silently. She'd been responding. To the message about me being emotional, Chloe wrote, "My mom's not emotional. She's just done pretending everything is fine when it isn't. There's a difference." To the one asking Chloe to talk to me, she wrote, "I'm not going to ask my mom to forgive someone who hasn't apologized. That wouldn't make sense, would it?"
I stared at that phone for a long time.
Then I looked at Chloe, who was chewing her thumbnail like she was waiting to be grounded. And I said, "You are the most incredible human I have ever met." She said, "So, I'm not in trouble?" I said, "Honey, the only person in trouble is your grandmother." Now, here's where people in my family say I went too far. And I genuinely want to know if you agree. I screenshotted every message my mother sent Chloe. Every one. And I sent them to every person who had called me selfish. Aunt Denise. Uncle Richard. Carol, with the stolen church centerpiece. No commentary. Just the screenshots. And one line. "This is what she's doing now," Aunt Denise called. And for the first time, didn't start by defending Eleanor. She said, "I didn't know she was doing that." I said, "There's a lot you don't know, Denise, because you only ever listen to one side." Uncle Richard? Radio silence, which honestly was an improvement. Michelle called me, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. She said, "Chloe is my hero. I'm buying that girl a pizza." And she did. Drove 40 minutes from Springfield with a large pepperoni and a stuffed triceratops for Leo because, in her words, this kid deserves a present for no reason. That's the kind of family I want around my children. After I sent those screenshots, there were 2 weeks of complete silence from Eleanor. She couldn't spin this one. Her own words. Her own grandchild's phone. Black and white. Then one Saturday morning, a knock at my door. My dad, Frank, standing on my porch in his old fishing hat, holding a bakery bag. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He sat down at my kitchen table, put the bag down, and said, "I brought those cinnamon rolls you liked when you were little." And then this man, who I have never once seen cry in my entire life, put his face in his hands and sobbed. He said, "I failed you, Sarah. I sat at that table and heard what your mother said, and I didn't speak because I've been afraid of that woman for 37 years. And I let it cost me my daughter and my grandkids." I said, "Dad, I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be honest." And he was. For 2 hours, he told me things he'd never said. That he always knew Mom was wrong. That every time I sent money, he felt sick. That he'd brought it up with her once, years ago, and she didn't speak to him for 11 days, so he never mentioned it again. Then, he said something that surprised me. "Your mother is scared, Sarah. She won't admit it, but she's terrified she's losing you, and she doesn't know how to fix it because everyone has always just bent." I said, "I know. I bent for 34 years. I'm done." He nodded. Then he said, "What if I stopped bending, too?" 2 days later, Dad told me he'd had a real conversation with my mother. He told her the picnic was wrong. The texts were wrong. The years of depending on me were wrong. And he told her if she didn't fix this, she'd lose him, too. Then, about 9 weeks after the picnic, my phone rang. My mother. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I need to talk to Leo. Because I owe that boy an apology. And I owe you one, too. I let the silence sit. Then I said, I'll think about it. Some of you might think I should have jumped at that. But after everything, the money, the picnic, the text to Chloe, the smear campaign, I needed to protect my kids first. Michelle said, let her come on your terms, in your house, and if she blows it, that's it. So I invited Eleanor for dinner the following Sunday. Just her, me, Chloe, and Leo. I told her to come with a real apology, or not come at all. She showed up at 5 o'clock in a dress, which she never wears for casual dinners. She brought yellow tulips. My favorite. I didn't think she remembered. Leo was on the couch, watching cartoons. He looked up at her, and didn't move. Didn't run to her like he used to. Just watched. And I saw it hit her, right across the face, what she had done. She walked over, knelt down, which, with her knees, was not easy, and said, Leo, Grandma needs to tell you something. What I said at the picnic was wrong and mean, and you did nothing wrong. You are my grandson, and I love you, and I am so sorry. Leo looked at her for about 5 seconds. Then he said, It's okay, Grandma. Do you want to see my new dinosaur? 6 years old. No grudge. No conditions. Just grace. The kind adults forget exists. She hugged him and cried. Real tears. Not performance tears. The kind where your shoulders shake and you can't talk. Over dinner she apologized to me, too. Said she knew she'd been unfair for years. Said she was going to start seeing a counselor, which nearly knocked me off my chair because Eleanor has always called therapy complaining to strangers. Then she looked at Chloe and said, I owe you an apology, too. I should never have sent those messages. You were right to stand up for your brother. Chloe said, Thank you, Grandma. But just so you know, I'll do it again if I have to. My mom actually laughed. A real one. And said, I believe you. Now, I'm not going to pretend everything is perfect. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight. I still don't send money. That's done permanently. My dad got a full-time job at a hardware store, and he talks about drill bits and lumber, and honestly, he sounds happier than he has in a decade. Aunt Denise brought me a casserole and said, I shouldn't have gotten in the middle of that. Without making eye contact. I'll take it. Uncle Richard still hasn't said a word, but at Thanksgiving, he sat next to Leo and asked him about every dinosaur by name. For Richard, that's practically a love letter. Michelle still comes over every other weekend with pizza and her boys. She's still my rock. Last week, she texted me, Day 147 of choosing yourself. Look how far you came. I cried reading that.
Good tears, though.
So that's my story. The picnic. The silence. The money. The texts. The screenshots. The cinnamon rolls. And the 13-year-old who stood up when nobody else would. If you enjoyed this story, I'd really appreciate a like. It means more than you know. And if something here reminded you of your own family, or if you think I handled something wrong, or you would have done it differently, tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you're going through something like this right now, if you're the one who always gives and never gets, who keeps the peace at the cost of yourself, I want you to know you're allowed to stop. You're allowed to say enough. And you might be surprised who's standing behind you when you finally do. For me, it was a girl in a volleyball t-shirt who looked my mother in the eye and said, Say that again.